Ben White cost Brighton nothing. He came up through their own academy, a defender nobody outside Sussex had heard of. Arsenal paid £50 million for him. Moises Caicedo cost £4 million, signed from a club in Ecuador most football fans could not find on a map. Chelsea paid £115 million for him, less than 3 years later. And this summer, a 26-year-old centre-back named John Paul van Hecke, bought for £1.8 million in 2020, was sold to Tottenham for 52. If this happened once, you'd call it luck. Brighton have done some version of it in 6 straight transfer windows. Different managers, different scouts, different sporting directors, some of whom got poached by the very clubs paying these prices. That's not luck, that is a system. But this is not really a football story. By the end of the video, you'll understand why Brighton's recruitment is not about getting every transfer right. It's about building a system that outperforms over time even when some of its decisions fail, and how you can apply the same thinking to your business. Tony Bloom has been a Brighton supporter since he was a boy. He's not a rich outsider who bought the club as a badge to collect. However, his background is not scouting or coaching, it's mathematics, studied at Manchester. Before he owned the club he loved, he was known in gambling circles as the Lizard, a professional gambler with a reputation for reading a match and reading a room better than almost anyone at the table. He built his fortune on Asian handicap betting, where teams begin with a virtual advantage or disadvantage before a ball is even kicked. The question is not who wins, it's whether the bookmaker has priced the gap between the two teams correctly. You only make money if your estimate is more accurate than theirs. That's the whole skill, pricing something more accurately than the person on the other side of the trade. In 2009, Bloom stepped in to take majority ownership of a club that was close to bankruptcy, in the third tier of English football, still playing in a stadium they did not own. There was no real purchase price. The previous owner simply stepped aside so Bloom could take over, in exchange for Bloom personally guaranteeing the money the club actually needed, an interest-free loan that will eventually grow to £93 million, almost all of it spent in building the American Express Stadium, the Amex. 8 years later, they were in the Premier League. The start was rocky. In their first 2 Premier League seasons, Brighton spent club record fees on attacking players who did not work out. Jurgen Locadia arrived for a club record fee and managed 3 goals in 35 Premier League games before leaving for nothing. Moises Caicedo came in the same era. 5 goals, 6 assists in 48 outings, gone the same way. A year later it was Alireza Jahanbakhsh, 2 goals in 50 appearances, eventually sold for a fraction of his fee. Finally, Bernardo, signed for £9 million. He left the club after 39 games for next to nothing. The club was criticized for it. From the outside, it looked like a newly promoted team overpaying out of excitement, where most promoted clubs do. What happened actually, underneath that, was different. In the same window, the one that produced the flops everyone remembered at the time, Brighton also signed a teenage midfielder from Argentina and immediately loaned him straight back to his old club. They also signed a young midfielder from a championship side. Those 2 players were Alexis McAllister and Yves Bissouma. McAllister in Liverpool, Bissouma in Tottenham. The system wasn't right every time, it was right on average, and it was patient enough to let the players that needed time to develop actually get it. Most clubs do not have the discipline for that. A signing that does not play immediately gets written off as a mistake long before it has had the chance to become something else. So, what is the system? Bloom's betting company, Star Lizard, built its edge by tracking football data at a scale most bookmakers could not match. It did not just track goals and assists, but the texture underneath the match, the pressure resistance, ball retention in tight spaces. How a player performs in a game is actually difficult. In 2017, that same data infrastructure was spun into its own company, Jamestown Analytics, built specifically to do one thing: to tell Brighton which players are worth more than their price tag says they are. It is structured deliberately to protect that edge too, by working with only one club per league at a time. So the advantage it hands Brighton isn't handed over to a direct rival in the same breath. For example, Bournemouth and Brentford. It is easy to underestimate its scale. Jamestown tracks every player in the world with over 3,000 minutes played, hunting for statistical outliers, not just goals and assists, but the numbers underneath those. And the data isn't the last word either. Before anyone signs, there's a character check too. Can the player fit in the dressing room? Can he handle the pressure of moving countries? Can he adapt to a faster league? The scouting is not organized the way most clubs do it, by region, where they send someone to watch a country. Brighton scouts by position, a specific person whose entire job is knowing the centre backs globally. The data flags the names first. A human will get involved after the numbers already think a player is interesting. And even then, a second person checks the first person's work, sorting every name into a simple verdict. Are they a strong fit, or should we move on? Since the model doesn't care about reputation, it does not stay in the leagues everyone else is watching. If two players grade the same but one plays in the Premier League and one plays in Ecuador, the second one is the opportunity. Nobody is bidding against you for him yet. That's the Asian handicap logic, just pointed at recruitment instead of odds. It's the same idea applied twice. What the flops actually did, if you run a business of your own, is worth sitting with. They gave Brighton a reason to adapt without ever threatening the club's survival. That's different from a system being right every time. Brighton does not need every signing to work. They need the winners to outweigh the losses by enough that the average comes out ahead. One Caicedo effectively funds 10 other players and still leaves a profit. Most businesses cannot say that. Most operate like they need every single client, every single hire, every single bet to be the right one, because there's no margin built in to absorb a bad one. When something does not work out, it is not a data point, it becomes a crisis. That's not a talent problem, it is a structure that was never built to be wrong sometimes and survive, unlike Brighton's. If any of this sounds familiar, if your business has no room for a bad month, a bad client, or signing that doesn't work out, that's not a pricing problem or marketing one, it's a structural one. The link below is a call where we look at exactly where that is happening in your business and discuss if it makes sense to work together. Brighton became the highest net spender in world football, nearly £210 million on 9 new players in a single summer window. On paper, that should contradict everything up to this point. The lesson in football is usually simple. The teams that spend the most win the most, and the teams that spend the least normally lose. Money still wins eventually. Brighton did not disprove that point. They just refused to choose between spending big and pricing carefully. They did both. Record spending and a profit at the end of it. They weren't paying for reputation, they were paying for mispriced talent. Other unfancied clubs have had moments like this before. Swansea had a style of play everyone admired for a few seasons. Southampton built an academy that kept producing talent. Leicester City pulled off a run of recruitment so good that they won the league outright. And most of their players were then poached by other big clubs, the Mahrez, Contes. All three had found a genuine edge, but none of it lasted. That is how usually these stories end. You can outperform the market for a while, but eventually the clubs with the deepest pockets catch up. The advantage disappears and the gap opens again. But what is different about this Brighton is where the edge actually lives. Graham Potter left for Chelsea and took 4 staff members with him. De Zerbi took over, took them to 6th place and their first European campaign, then left too. Every time the club has treated this as something survivable rather than fatal, because what is doing the real work was not the manager or the scouts, it was the model underneath them, which does not resign or get poached. People rotate through, but the data keeps improving. Brighton are still playing this hand with a short stack, against clubs who can shrug off a bad signing and just buy again. Brighton cannot afford that. Every decision matters when you don't have the depth to absorb a mistake the way City or Chelsea can. But that is exactly the kind of game Bloom has always known to play. And right now, the model has already placed its next bet. Last season, Karalampus Kostulas came up through the Olympiacos Academy and was the standout of the side that won the UEFA Youth League in 2024. 5 goals, 2 assists, scoring in almost every knockout match, leading the press from the front at the age of 17. Brighton did not wait to see if that form carried into senior football. He was promoted to Olympiacos' first team, scored 7 goals in the Greek Super League, and Brighton signed him before he'd even played in the Premier League. Timas is another startling case, who came through PAOK's academy in Greece, scoring so consistently for the reserve side that he was fast-tracked into the first team. From there he moved to Nürnberg in Germany's second division for 18 million euros. That is such an enormous fee for a Bundesliga 2 side to pay. Brighton signed him away for 26.5 million euros the very next day. Then immediately agreed he'd finish the season on loan back at Nürnberg, specifically so he can keep developing under his manager, Miroslav Klose, who promptly helped him to 10 goals in 17 games. Timas is currently out on injury, which is a bad timing in kind, but doesn't undo what Brighton saw before anyone else was bidding. So neither of these two players has been a case study. There's no outcome to point to. Every player before has been explained backward from the result you already know. But this is the same bet placed the same way, with the result still unwritten. Maybe it becomes another Caicedo, maybe it becomes a squad player who makes Brighton better without even being sold. Bloom did not build a system that only wins when a transfer fee says so. He built one that's right often enough to keep being trusted with the next hand. He still takes the train to some home games with the rest of the fans, not because he needs to prove anything. By any measure that matters to him, the numbers already have. He does it because somewhere underneath the algorithm, the syndicate, and the £93 million, he's just the guy who loves his club, watching a bet he placed years ago finally show its hand.